All right, this is great. We've got a lot of people already online, so we're going to get going. I want to thank you very much for joining us as we talk today about breaking down an attack and understanding what's really happening, understand how experts take a look at these things, what's happening on the systems that are affected, and how you can get better. We're going to be talking a little bit about the general topic of malware. We're going to be looking at its real impact, but mainly we're going to be talking about the ways to better defend yourselves using a lot of the native capabilities that exist inside the Microsoft platform. I'm Jack Danahy, and I'm sort of your host for this. But the real hosts, the real folks who are going to be adding value here are technical folks who understand and have done this for many years. I'm joined today by Ryan Berg, a technical fellow with the New Harbor Security, with whom I've had the great luck to work for almost 30 years on a variety of different security enterprises and companies. And Ryan will be helping us to better understand how remediation is a really big part of taking advantage of the value inside that Microsoft platform. We're really fortunate to be joined by two leaders who come to us from TD SYNNEX who are familiar with how these attacks happen and actually have the infrastructure to be able to show you how these attacks transpire and how they can affect the systems that they're on. Here at New Harbor, we see these preparation mechanisms. We work with great partners like TD SYNNEX. We work with our clients. And through our work with both commercial and state and local governments, we protect about a third of the U.S. population. So we've seen a lot of this. And we hope that we can share some of that experience with you. As we come through this, we want you to be thinking about the goals of security people in general. And these are really reflected in the goals from New Harbor Security. We like to think about cybersecurity as a very, very personal, very, very bespoke enterprise for most people. Technologies in cybersecurity are great, and there are many, but each of us, each of our organizations use them differently. And to talk about security, most people recognize that it's not like a thing. It's not like a database. Security is a characteristic that weaves its way through the organizations where we work, through our interactions with our partners and our customers, and through the way that we set our own expectations, whether it's with our management teams, our legislatures, or our investors. So it really is a very personal thing. And at New Harbor, we recognize that through forums like this, where we share information and just the day-to-day way we deal with our clients, we're trying to bring some of that personal nature of cybersecurity to our clients by making cybersecurity more understandable. And for us, that means whether we're talking about alerting that comes through 24/7 operations, or we're talking about identifying and perhaps prioritizing vulnerabilities that have to get fixed, whether they're found because there's a new CVE or because in some pen testing we do, we identify it. And we also like to help organizations understand the impact on the organization as a whole. And so we do a lot of work in terms of advisory and compliance work, testing, readiness assessments. And as I go through these, I'm sure each one of you who's taking time to participate with us today, you can actually feel some of what we're trying to say because we're trying to talk to you, whether you're an executive inside an organization, whether you're struggling against cybersecurity threats that are growing all the time inside a small company, or perhaps you're in the middle of an organization that's trying to make sure that people can vote or get the social services that they need. We're trying to talk to you. You don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to understand the way that cybersecurity works or to understand all the value from the presenters who are going to be talking today. So as we move into this presentation, we are excited, again, to share the floor with experts Greg Wilson and Mike Spadolini from TD SYNNEX and our own Ryan Berg to think more and to do more with these results.
All right. Hey guys, I'm going to kick it off here and I'm going to show you how easy it is to do a phishing attack. So everybody always knows MFA is a great thing. Everybody needs to have it, but it's not end all be all. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in, share my screen. You're going to see a tool pop up, and this is just a reverse proxy phishing tool. It's an open source tool that anyone can use. And I'm going to show you how easily I can bypass Microsoft MFA and steal somebody's credentials. So once I'm logging in here, I'm going to enable some fishlets in a domain. As you can see here, I have this domain that I created, enabling the fishlets, getting the TLS securities, And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a lure. So what a lure is it's a very fancy way of saying I wrote a bunch of scripts in these fishlets, and I have a URL domain, which you can see right here. This domain, notfishingtoday.com, it's for testing purposes. So in a phishing campaign, what you will likely see is a domain that closely resembles, like Microsoft support, microsoftonline.us, AWS, Amazon, LinkedIn, whatever it is. It's going to be basically a spoof domain of something that's real. And you're going to probably receive this in an email or one of your users, right? They're not going to be paying attention. They'll click on that without knowing what it is, and once they do that, it's game over. So I'm going to just copy and paste this link into a browser. So let me go ahead and share my full desktop for you right now. Let me get this browser going. So once I come in here, I'm going to paste this. And as you can see what happens, you can see the tool already picked it up, that somebody already arrived at this site. And when you look at this, it's going to actually bring me to a page that looks just like a Microsoft login, right? You can't tell the difference. It looks like I'm doing anything. So I'm going to go with Johnny Utah at tdcynics.com. Actually, let me just pull this up. I've got it here. As you can see, username and password was picked up. Right now, I'm actually going on my Authenticator app, typing in this code. I'm using my Face ID. It's just the Microsoft Authenticator app. As you can see, I just logged in. I don't want to stay logged in. When we go here, it's going to pick up, see, Johnny Utah, tdcynicsSC.com. Batman89 is the password that you saw me type in. Now what I need to do is, if I type in sessions, this is going to show me a list of all the sessions that I've got going on, right? So if I want to just go into sessions 30. When I type in sessions 30, this is the one that I just stole. Do you see this link right here? This whole thing is the MFA token. So what I would do with this is I would just come in, I'd go into a private browser, I'd use a cookie editor, paste this in here, and I could easily steal somebody's session. So from what you saw is it took me, someone who is not a professional malicious hacker, I'm not a red team or anything like that. I'm just an engineer that has access to some tools like this, and it took me all of 3 minutes to successfully just steal somebody's username, password, and steal their session. So from here, what I could do is I could just do a plethora of lateral movements, drop some malware in there, drop some hidden artifacts, maybe some nested attacks that are going to be low fidelity that'll sit in there for a while that you can't see. Um, so I just wanted to show you this is how easy it is for just the average person. Even you could do this, steal somebody's username, password that has MFA. And you have to think right now, Ryan's going to talk about this too. These known nation state actor groups, they're not just doing these one at a time. They're selling packages to steal thousands and thousands of passwords and usernames for pennies on the dollar. So if you think you're safe from attacks just because you've got maybe Duo or some type of 2FA or MFA going on, you're really not, because this tool is just one of probably, 50 plus different phishing tools that are out there. So for the sake of time, I'm going to pass this along to Greg White or Greg Wilson, my colleague. He's going to show you how Sentinel can pick up this incident. And then Ryan's going to go into a little bit later how you can dive deeper into this incident with playbooks and responding to it with, threat responses and hunting and things like that. So Greg, if you want to take it away, I'll
Yes,
give it
sir.
on to you.
All right, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Yes, and really powerful stuff there from Mike as far as how your logins can be manipulated to steal your credentials. So what I'm going to bring up here is a tool called Sentinel. Many of you have heard of this before, some of you not. That's okay. That's why I'm here. It's essentially a seam. So its whole function is to take logs from various sources, on-prem, multi-cloud, and everything Microsoft, and bring it into one place. Because with all of those different security tools, it's very difficult if you don't have some kind of SIEM technology to find patterns in these tools. So although Defender can issue out its own incidents, or Purview, or Cisco, or AWS, they all have their incidents they can issue out and tell you things wrong. But to find patterns in that, we need a tool like Sentinel. So, and as an example of what Sentinel can do, let's take a look at what Mike just did. Remember, the tool that he used was called Evil Jinx. And right here, you can see that Evil Jinx is being used. All right, if we dive a little bit deeper, this is the incidents page for Microsoft Sentinel. You can think of incidents as a case. So Sentinel determines that from its various sources that there is a security issue that needs to be looked at. It presents this case, if you will, which we call an incident. And it does that by severity and source. So if we go to full details, this gives us the first step in building that narrative, right? Because what do we need to do when we have a potential incident in our environment? We need to build that narrative as quickly as possible, because the narrative then is going to drive our response. And the great thing is, after I'm done here, Ryan's going to talk about the detection and remediation portion, so he'll go a little bit deeper into that. But this is where it all begins, this building the narrative towards what we need to do and who needs to be informed. So you can see, it gives me a list of both entities here, as well as a timeline. And I can look at any of these entities and use Microsoft Sentinel's UEBA engine. This is your user entity behavior analytics. It allows us to look at behaviors of not only the object itself, if it's been seen in the environment, but also any peers that it may have. Now, this is not an internal entity, so it's not going to have a history. However, it will look across the environment's history to see, have we seen Evil Jinx before? Have we seen this hash file before? And if there were any IP addresses, URLs, they all reflect here as well. So it's going to take that information and drive to see if we have further evidence to investigate here. And we can also go to the timeline as well to show what has happened as far as either here, or we go back to our original timeline if we have seen this in prior incidents. So it looks like we haven't seen Evil Jinx before. But it does give us detections here and descriptions of that detection. So along with that, we can also remediate with some suggestions here. But of course, these are just your generalized suggestions, and Ryan's going to tell you a little bit more about perhaps more specifics on that. So I think it's good to take a step back, though, and say, okay, we've detected something that's happened. How hard is this to get going? How sophisticated is Sentinel? Am I going to spend all my time taking care of it and babying it along? Because, sophisticated tools, in my experience, can be a bit sophisticated to maintain and bring into play. Well, fortunately, for me, I'm a rather simple guy. I like more simple things. And so Sentinel has a number of solutions for you. If we're looking for what causes the data to be brought in, or how it's being brought in, it's brought in through a series of connectors. These connectors can be just like Sentinel itself when it comes to data, third party. It can be Microsoft native, or we can bring in multi-cloud. And if you look here, you can see that we have some third party, 1Password, we have Atlassian, we have Azure, AWS is hiding here somewhere. There is AWS S3 buckets is here as well. And these guys are how Sentinel gets information, grabs those logs, and brings them into Sentinel. Well, technically under the hood, it brings it into a place called the Log Analytics Workspace. That workspace then takes those logs that arrive, normalizes them, parses them, and then puts them into a table. Sentinel will then use that information to apply its machine learning and its UABA engine, as well as the analytics or rules that we'll talk about here in a second, to determine whether or not we have security issues. And it will do that through alerts and, just like I said before, through incidents or these cases that we have. So you can see here that we don't have this one connected, but this is a good demonstration to show you what you would see when you're going to connect it. If we look at something that is connected, like we see data coming in, so we'll go to Azure Activity. You can see that we have a number of indicators. This one was ingested last 54 minutes ago. It gives us by graph how much we've ingested. It also gives us the specific table. Now, it's beyond the scope of this discussion right now to talk about the specifics of the Kusto query language, but just know that the tables themselves can be queried directly. So you can go and look directly at those tables that have been parsed and normalized to find whatever information you have through either customized queries or ones that come out of the box from Sentinel. But that's a good idea. Let's take a look at those analytics a little bit closer. Now remember, these analytics are the things that drive the rules, which really are the rules. They are the thing that out of tolerance condition that you're looking for. And what I mean by that is, for example, here's a custom one I built for Windows firewall, host firewall tampering. Should Sentinels discover that there is a host tampering, the way it would do that is by looking at this particular rule and applying that rule to the logs in the Loginix workspace. You can see here it's pretty simple. The event table filters for event logs, particularly the Windows firewall logs, and it looks for an event ID. Simple as that. These are customizable. I can change these, add to them, take away from them, create a whole new one myself. As you can see, I labeled it custom. You can label it whatever you want. I just happen to put it that way so that I can determine what's out of the box and what's not. If we look at something that's more out of the box, something you get automatically. For example, this one, new user assigned privileged role. And I happen to have reviewed this since it was updated, but we'll go and take a closer look at it to get an idea of what you would be doing when you're manipulating or enabling a rule. All of these rules that come out of the box are also maintained by Microsoft. Their threat analytics team, all of their security, there are over 10,000 security members, have some contribution to these analytics. So you're not alone on this. You are being brought in with a team of security analysts. And every once in a while, they'll offer updates. Some of them can be significant, some not so much. But you have the option to either keep your current edition or go with the new one. It's really up to you. So if you see here, we have a lot of different ways we can look at this. We can change the severity, we can change the description, as well as MITRE ATT&CK. If you're not familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, it is a threat framework that allows us to identify threats that attackers will use to invade our environment. We go to the logic itself. You can see here that this one is a little bit more hefty, right? Again, KQL really is a mixture between what was the SQL language and PowerShell. So although it's just descriptive, it is a very powerful, but easy to learn, hard to master type of query language. Lots of people get started very quickly. And if you have something like ChatGPT, or better yet, Security Copilot, you can even move faster than that. And I can manipulate and change any of this. I can test this with current data. And if this doesn't come back with any results, that's okay, because then I know I don't have any of these conditions in my environment. But what I'm looking for here is any failures. So if there were any failures that came up from this, if the logic did not work, it would tell me that it doesn't work. And that's okay, because then I can go back and debug my code. I can also change it, the query, to run at a certain specific interval, or maybe even disable it, or tell it only fire off after 3 incidents like this occur. It's really up to you to customize. Again, it allows for grouping, and you can also assign to it automations, the SOAR function, right? When you have an incident that occurs, you can do something as simple as post a message in Teams that this has occurred. Or more significantly, you can say, if this occurs, disable an account. So the spectrum is wide when it comes to responses, because it really is harnessing the power of logic apps. And if you're familiar with logic apps, when it comes to the Sentinel or to the Azure environment or Microsoft, it's pretty much everything that you need to do. And this applies to third parties and into multi-cloud as well. And again, it will check all of our work to make sure we haven't told it to do something silly that makes it not work, and then save. That is how hard it is to get going. So you can really have a robust mechanism to let us know that something has happened, to start driving that discussion that we may have a security issue. We have an easy way to bring logs in from various sources across our entire environment, whether that's third party or multi-cloud. And by the way, all of these connectors that are third party or multi-cloud, they are all maintained by and built by those respective companies. So Microsoft didn't build password connector and then hopefully it worked. They had an agreement with 1Password and they would build it for them. So every time that you're connecting based on the technology that 1Password has said is the best way to set up this environment. And of course, when it comes to the analytics as well, it's easy to change these. You can get started quickly through using through a number of templates, or you can build your own, just like I did, or somewhere in between. Start with something that is out of the box, and then from there you can customize it to whatever you want. But all of this, every bit of this activity is really building towards building that narrative. And that narrative really, again, its whole function is to do one thing, to provide us a direction that we can then take these detections and then start remediating, stopping the bleeding. So I think now is a good time to hand it over to Ryan. He's got some really great information on these next two functions on how best you can execute once you've built that narrative in detection and in remediation. Ryan?
Welcome. Thank you, Greg. I think, I think this is, I'm going to say this. I think most of the audience probably already knows this, right? Is that the battle is effectively asymmetric, meaning that as a defender, you need to be right 100% of the time. And the attacker really only needs you to make one mistake, and one mistake then leads to can lead to a lot of activity. And that the amount of tools that are being brought to bear in the security environment, I've been participating in RSA for it seems like 30 years, and I'm always mystified when I go there and I walk the floor at how many security companies are saying, well, we've got a hammer and your problem is a nail problem. And that has been part of the challenge in the security industry, is that not everyone speaks security geek. And even those that speak security geek maybe don't understand the practical implications of bringing some of these tools into your environment. The Defender platform, the Sentinel platform, we gave you a really a whirlwind tour, but they go deep and very deep. And to be able to unlock the potential of that platform really requires a lot of expertise, in terms of how am I going to do these rules? How am I going to manage these rules? How many rules do I enable? How do I correctly configure this? Because we're talking about ingest. And so one of the things that we did bring up is cost. Well, all these things, have a bearing. Sometimes I get questions from clients, which could be, hey, well, I've got Defender. What is Sentinel really adding to this picture? Because some of you may have seen Sentinel say, oh, well, it seems like I get a lot of this in Defender. What is Sentinel really buying? Well, there are a lot of reasons why you want to be able to bring both tools to bear. Greg sort of highlighted that briefly by talking about third-party data sources, right, where it allows you to bring in logs from your firewall, logs from third-party connectors. If you're using Okta or third-party auth providers, 2.0, and you want those logs in place, or you're using third-party cloud and you want those logs in place to allow you to create customized rule set that tie in data sources from multiple places, not just what's happening in Defender. Sometimes when we're looking at automation, there are plenty of places you can apply automation. There are some automations you can do directly in Defender. If you want suppression rules or exclusion rules. Sometimes suppression and exclusion rules are not really sufficient in order to reduce alert fatigue for certain kinds of alerts, where when you have access to a broader set of data tables, you can do that, right? All those things are things where you want to be able to unlock the power of the platform, because you're really fighting an asymmetric battle where the defender really only has to be right 100% of the time. The attacker only needs to be really right once. Next slide. I've alluded to this, and this is, if any of you have ever seen that, and I'm sure you've been in multiple vendors, everyone sort of really talks about the complexity. This is another picture that sort of describes this. One thing that's not on here is all the cloud vendors. If you were to apply a slide and apply all the cloud vendors or all the security vendors, this slide can get really complex, because it's, we're talking about just email, endpoints, identities, and workloads. Now, if you were to overlap the model of, well, which cloud providers you have, then this becomes an infinite complexity. And really, whether it's just I'm going to click on an email attachment, right? We see this. I see this on a daily basis. We are very click happy. There was an attack I did way back when, which was on certificates. I think this is going back 20 years ago, where it was just doing an ARP attack, and I did it as a test in one of my previous companies. Where, remember the dialog box that used to pop up? And we didn't have the green icon in the corner of the browser that would say, oh, this is a valid certificate. And that dialog box used to pop up, and everyone would click accept, because it was something that was in the barrier of me doing work. So I mentally decide that this is something that I need to do. So the next reaction is I click accept. And it was really easy just to sort of, back then, really intercept communication at the ARP level, connect DNS, and then be able to take over whole websites just by doing a very simple thing. And people would say, oh, well, isn't the SSL protecting me here? And then the reality was that users don't really care. They're going to click accept, even though it's a foreign certificate. Well, the same thing happens in email. Everyone gets really click happy. I've seen it, in Defender, you can turn on, you can report email as phishing or malware. And what I see oftentimes is that you got a few users which use that a lot, and they click on everything. They, oh, yes, okay. Every time they get an email, they click on. If I recognize this isn't from someone that I'm expecting to, they click on that link. And then if you were to look secondarily to that, I created a custom workbook for that to show an organization saying, well, you only have one person who's reporting this, and this exact email is going to 50 or 100 different users. And you don't really understand who's clicking and not clicking. Well, that information is available inside Defender. But sometimes it's not just the person that clicked, because these things can be dormant. Because it sits in a user box, it's sort of waiting. It's waiting for someone, for someone to click. So this area of complexity is just expanding. It's growing with the number of security technologies, and it's also growing with our remote workforce and B2B, B2C, you name it. We have all these different connections. Back in the late 90s, we used to talk about organizations as being like an M&M, and with firewalls. It was, everyone had a firewall. You had the hard outer shell, and it was a soft GUI center. Well, we have that in spades now, because the shell is really gone. There isn't much of a shell. Firewalls are doing very limited work these days. IDSs are doing some. We had WAFs, which were doing some work. And I remember early on, WAFs had a lot of automation, but then there were a lot of concern with sensitive servers. Do I turn WAFs on and auto block? And they're blocking business continuity. So WAFs are still have a place, but the promise of these security technologies that we're going to be blocked first, right, has really transitioned. That you have technologies which are blocking, and you have technologies which are response, but the monitoring piece is one in which is really the first one in. What are your canaries in the coal mine? Email is one of them. We talked about, Greg, I think it was Mike that talked about The access brokers, I see that quite a bit, where accounts come in, whether it's through a water hole, whether it's through email, whether it's through these with various attacks in order to get the account access, and then the attack goes dormant, or you don't see a direct next action. And it's oftentimes because those accounts are being hoovered, collected en masse, determine which businesses do I have which account for, what level of access do I actually have, and then that is sold. So you can have an account access which is broken, that can sit dormant until that account is actually sold and someone else takes over. So these attacks can be very pinpoint. Come in, gain access, don't do anything. Nothing suspicious next through MFA. And depending on how that's done, sometimes it's done through a proxy, right? Can you make it a little bit more obvious? But a lot of organizations don't really have a really good sense of who their users are and what devices they're coming in from. Go ahead, next slide. Right. On top of that is the fact that our security practitioners are really working overtime, whether in terms of the number of alerts. You can turn, if you turn on Defender, if you turn on all the ASR rules, if you turn on all the rules, then all of the activity can become, oh, wait a minute, how do I make sense of what rules are really valid? How do I turn these out, and how do I make these rules sort of mold around my organization? Because sometimes you have device policies which, oh, MFA is enabled. I've seen some cases where an organization swears, it says, oh, guess what? Yeah, we have MFA enabled. And then you see what's logged in and you realize, oh, guess what? Well, these accounts right here are logging into this application and MFA is not being enforced. Sometimes it could be, oh, well, hey, I didn't really realize that I have some accounts that are logging into MFA. Could be I've got a different business partner and those rules didn't apply to them. I've got a mismatch in my conditional access policy. All those things lead to a real complex environment where organizations are sometimes struggling, where they don't even know what they don't know. And the tools can help make that visible, but not unless you have sort of the expert user on the other side that can see through that and asking the right questions, saying, oh, well, I'm seeing this and this authentication is occurring. I did see it occurring through a VPN. Do you have an official list of VPN providers? Sometimes organizations do. My recommendation is always to, but I recognize that the complexity of a business is sometimes where you have to work in this environment where, well, I have to allow this access to occur. How can I make sure that this access is occurring for the right people at the right time with the right levels of security being applied, the right level of conditional access? Requires a lot of interaction, a lot of good questions being asked of the business, and a lot of pressure on the day-to-day analysts, which is what I call sitting in the hot seat with immediate response times, with a slew of alerts, and sometimes alert comes in that they've never seen before, and being able to move through the system to apply the right level of both triage and the right level of both response when I see something coming into my organization, which is a snowflake or a lately or a how should I describe this? A uncommonly but commonly seen event, right? So these are events that trigger infrequently, but they trigger always for the same reason. It could be I've got a backup account which is always running, once a month, that is doing this high privilege activity. It may throw off a whole bunch of alerts, and now I'm seeing this, and I actually want to tune this out. Requires a level of sophistication and understanding of both the environment as well as how do I apply automation when I can't just do a suppression rule. I can't just do an exclusion. I actually have to dig into the logs to make sure that it's this account, the password hasn't been changed, it's from this user during this maintenance window. All those things that are things that you can build into logic apps so that you can sort of tune the environment so that I'm really focused on the exceptions to what becomes normal business activity. Requires a level of sophistication of leveraging these tools in what I would call a rather sophisticated way to get the most impact and reduce what I call the speed to resolution, at the same time to reduce the cognitive load of the analyst. Because that's really what I see the challenge in our industry is. We talk about how fast can I get to resolution, but we can't ignore that we also need to reduce the cognitive load of the analysts that we have working on these issues. Next slide. Right, so this is an example of the earlier attack, right? A, a very similar manifestation of that attack is atypical travel, unfamiliar login details. These are what I consider to be canary in the coal mine types of things, where they flag a lot, right? With the introduction of VPNs, it seems like everyone is using a VPN these days. And so the atypical travel is oftentimes related to VPN activity. Oh, I just used a VPN, and it makes it appear as if this user is in two different places because they just logged in. They just logged in from New York. They get on a VPN which says they're logging in from California, and it triggers an alert. Right. Well, the malicious activity actors are using these canary in the coal mines to sort of mask the fact that they're gaining access, high level access, bypassing MFA, and still it is a legitimate user that's using MFA, that's logging in from something which is a VPN, and unless you have really strong conditional access, which says, oh, is it an approved list of VPNs? Many organizations don't have an approved list of VPNs. It's like any VPN or any proxy is available. Well, that makes this challenge even more difficult, because now you're like, oh, is this particular user logging? Have they ever logged in from this location? Are they logging in from are they traveling? Is this legitimate activity? There's lots of other things that you now have to bring into context to take something which seems rather a noisy alert to make it be, hey, this really is a canary in the coal mine. So how can I both reduce the noise but also increase the value? That this is oftentimes the first time that I or the first place that I can prevent the bad actor, the attacker, from getting access. And time can be of the essence. I did mention earlier, said, well, sometimes the account just sits. It sits there. It's sold. And so it can be sit there for a long period of time. But other times I've seen attacks in which you have one failure to success, and in that time, once they get success, a lot of activity occurs. So in between, you get one failure in your logs that says, oh, okay, but this user, MFA is required, and the next login is success, and that time window can be very narrow, and then all this other activity can occur. It could be I'm changing my MFA device. I've seen that, in which the user then registers a new MFA device, right? And if you don't actually understand which devices are your users, that can be also a very difficult challenge to overcome as an organization, because you don't understand what users are. Sometimes it can be, I can't put a mobile policy, which is, there's legitimate reasons why I can't apply a mobile policy that says that this is in the Microsoft vernacular, Intune registered device. Without being able to do that, then you don't necessarily even know whether, even though MFA is being done correctly, that the MFA is being done from a device which is your actual user that you expect it to be done from. And there's an additional work that has to be done in order to triage those kinds of things. Because if you just get used to, hey, MFA, I'm using MFA, therefore I don't have those problems. As Mike showed you earlier, MFA is not necessarily it is a great bar. Don't get me wrong. Everyone should be using MFA. Everyone should be enforcing MFA. MFA should be being enforced across your domain, across all your apps. In an even better world, that the MFA is being done from a device which is registered inside an Intune, because once you have that level of understanding your organization, there's a lot of things that you can eliminate. Because once you know that, hey, this is MFA, this is this user, it's this device, versus and even though it's going through a VPN, and I haven't constricted my VPN policies so that it's an allowed VPN, and I think you use any VPN, it does give you a much tighter lens of control, because I now know that it is this user who's actually doing MFA versus a new device. And I can also look at the activity logs, see whether the device was recently registered or recently changed. Next slide. And this is really where, I think, the benefit of leveraging, an expert, an MSP, allows you to do things that you may not be currently doing in your organization. One is the obvious one is 24/7. Attackers are not sleeping. They're coming from multiple countries at multiple times a day. They often take advantage of the fact that people are traveling. I've got a global workforce. It could be your employee is working at an airport lounge, and they're using the Wi-Fi. They're not using a VPN. They're not really checking the access point. They don't really realize that a sophisticated attacker can easily confuse an unsophisticated user that they're accessing they believe they're accessing the airport Wi-Fi, and they're accessing a Wi-Fi access point just because of the power, the location and power of the device that the hacker is controlling, can allow people to connect to an access point that they don't trust. I mean, we all, hotels, another common place in which we see places where access points come in. It says, oh, well, I'm at the Hilton, so you put in a Hilton guest A access point. People attempt to access the internet through that. Even though they're doing a VPN, you don't have a lot of protections in those kinds of cases. And having a professional environment, which allows you to validate, hey, what is this place? What is this access that's really coming from? Is this, who's the hosting provider? Are we bringing in additional dynamic context, which is, what is the IP reputation of this? Is the IP reputation saying that this is a domain that was recently used in a number of attacks? Sometimes that environment is contained inside the alert. Sometimes it's empty. One of the things I've seen is the rise of IPv6, that a lot of organizations now see IPv6 and IP addresses in their environment, and those oftentimes you don't really know where those IPv6 addresses, because now the address space is magnified even bigger, that we've got lots of smaller companies, shell companies, LLCs, which are hosted in the US, which when you would peel back where that LLC comes back, it's really an entity which is owned in Russia, owned in some foreign country. That level of bringing that dynamic context collection is a really important part of when an alert fires, is bringing everything I know about this to bear in a fast and immediate place to take action. Another thing is, you can use things like Teams and adaptive cards. An adaptive card allows Teams to be used in an interactive way, in which an alert can come in, and if there is an approval list that you need to validate, hey, is this user supposed to be traveling? You can leverage adaptive cards as an automation to reach out directly into the organization, to that employee's admin, to say, hey, do I expect this user to be traveling? Simple yes, no can then change the course of the interaction between how this alert is triaged. Those kinds of automations usually require some level of professional development, because logic apps, I'll be frank, while I love logic apps, the UI environment for those can be challenging for doing some more complex things. You can get yourself in some trouble without understanding how the implementation behind logic apps work. One question I commonly ask folks is, do you actually understand how loops work in logic apps? Chances are many people do not understand how loops work in logic apps. And by not understanding that, you can get yourself in a place where it's giving you the wrong answer at the wrong time, which in a sensitive area such as security can be a challenge. Right. And then the next thing is, what do I do? Right. What actions can I take? As I mentioned, the adaptive cards, it could be resetting user passwords, removing sessions, revoking sessions, setting user passwords, running scans, any number of activities. It could be, I'm working with a client right now, which is looking at how to leverage their Mimecast investment. And when an alert comes in, something gets through Mimecast, gets deployed to the user, and now I see that this phishing email was reported by a user, got through Mimecast, is touching 50 other different users in there. Well, then you can leverage the power of Logic Apps to say, well, I just want to add this sender to my block domain. I want to put that sender in jail, and I can do that in an automated fashion just by gathering the telemetry, being able to see the impact of this, and reaching out to your other security tools and leveraging them in a more sophisticated way. So I often think of the Sentinel platform or the SOAR platform, and being driven by an expert or user allows you to unlock the investment. You've spent a considerable amount of time and energy and expense, both in terms of staffing, budgetary, deployment, and now you're looking at, I've got an F1 car, and now I want to be driven by an F1 driver, and leveraging the power of an MSP, where they say, guess that's what we do. I do it, I work as an F1 driver and help other organizations, both in terms of bringing that capability in internally, as well as delivering that, so you could unlock the potential of that investment. With that, I believe, next slide, I believe we're going to pass it off, because we have last slide really is XDR, SIEM, MXDR. I will touch on this really briefly and turn over to Jack for closing remarks and questions. Is that the SIEM piece of this, the Sentinel component, is a really powerful component in the Defender and shouldn't be overlooked. Some people think, oh, well, what am I getting? So if I'm investing in the Microsoft platform in Defender, SIEM is going to allow you to do a lot of things. The Sentinel environment, a lot of things you can't do really well in the native Defender platform. Some simple things as well. Defender only has a 30-day retention period. So if you have any sort of compliance requirements for longer retention periods, well, you're likely going to want to leverage that in Sentinel. And then you're going to want to talk about what your data retention architecture is, because on the surface, Sentinel can seem to be really expensive on the ingest side. If you're ingesting everything into the base Sentinel deployment and you're not looking at, oh, well, maybe this is a low volume, or it could be a high volume, low signal type of data source. Sometimes your firewall logs can be extremely voluminous in terms of volume of logs, but the value of those at a security incident are really isolated, because there's a lot of work that you can do without actually having to touch a firewall log, and you may want to have that in a lower tier level of service inside the Sentinel platform, which requires some level of data architecture to understand, hey, how am I going to maximize the potential of the platform at the cost, which is going to meet me in the business that says, oh, okay, this might be a place that I can leverage this differently. The other thing that Greg didn't really show you is the power of workbooks. Workbooks is dashboards, right? As an example, I created a workbook for an organization to show them, hey, every time you get these URL clicks, I created a workbook that says every time that you're getting a URL click, how many other users in your organization are also getting that email. You can do those kinds of things in Sentinel that you can't do in Defender. And so you can really leverage the combination of both those solutions to really, what I believe, give a really powerful solution, much broader security visibility, and in my experience, really do that thing that I mentioned earlier, which is to unleash the power of the platform to increase your speed to resolution, at the same time to decrease the cognitive load of your analysts through automation. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff for closing comments and questions.
Thank you, Rye. I think one of the biggest things to take away from this, and I recognize we're going a little bit long, and I hope you're getting value out of these few extra minutes, but super quickly, and I think this goes back to some of the commentary that both Greg and Mike were making at the top of the show. What's really changing in the cybersecurity environment is, as soon as I get past, and I think it's Tootsie Rolls, Rye, the hard, crunchy outside, soft, chewy center, as we've moved into that environment, it's no longer easy to find a single place to get the information that tells you what's going on when there's a breach. So you really have to be gathering information from a variety of different places, because you're looking for patterns. Specifically, if I'm just looking at endpoint, I won't notice patterns at the wall or patterns at the gateway. If I'm just looking at the wall, I won't notice things happening on the internal network, or I won't notice repeated failures, those kinds of things. So a couple of takeaways from this discussion is, number one, make sure you're gathering enough data so you can look for patterns, right? Not patterns on a single machine necessarily. A successful attack against one machine is far less interesting than the same successful attack against 10. And one of the reasons we want to do this with our partners at TD SYNNEX is to show what kind of value you get from a platform like Sentinel that allows you to bring a lot of that data together and act automatically. And remember, acting automatically doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stop it or isolate it or what have you. You might, but it may be enrichment. You may go get another answer. You may go get another source of telemetry dragged in so the analyst has an easier job, to Rye's point about how much intellectual headspace it takes to solve these problems. So obviously, when we're having that discussion, having some expert support makes a difference. Not necessarily every day and in every way, but helping you with the playbooks, helping you with the configurations, helping you with trainings like this, helping you with understanding what's really a problem, and recognizing that no single solution is going to be enough. It was a great demonstration of how even the excellence of MFA can sometimes not be enough, right? There has to be multiple things you're doing, and some of them, right, some of them have to be predicated on assuming that everything else didn't work, right? And this is why so much of what goes on in the automation capabilities of Sentinel and the automation capabilities of your own team, right, to use different tools together to solve problems are so important, because frankly, lots of things are going to happen, whether it's socially engineered, user behavior mistakes, credential theft. Any of these things can cause a lot of these problems that may not be caught by traditional ways you look for them. So remember, as best you can, connect with the right amount of volume, the right amount of priority, the right kind of storage, any of the data sources you think you're going to need to feed these kinds of problems and to understand what's going to happen at the end. And so to close, we have some questions that have come in over the wire. I don't think we really have time. You've been very patient with us as we've run a few minutes long. So I'll make the commitment for myself and the rest of the team. We'll get the answers to the questions that have popped in out to you following the end of this. And I would like to say, if you're wondering where to get started, right, it is very, very common to watch a demonstration of a breach in 6-point type and not necessarily feel like you truly understood what it was. Or maybe you watch somebody doing complex analysis in a tool or a platform like Sentinel, and you're not exactly sure how I wire it up or how I can have that kind of experience. Or you listen to Rye go on about some of these attacks and ways you can discover them and all these events in the past. Sometimes if you're not sure where to start, one of the great things to do is to just bring somebody in and ask them a bunch of questions, right? A security roadmap isn't what to buy when. A security roadmap is, how do I think about my environment differently? How do I know it's going to grow? How do I know with the sensitivities of my clients? Because as I mentioned at the top, a lot of this is really very, very personal to your business and to the leaders that operate it. Let people talk to you. Let us talk to you about how you can better understand how to move forward. And sometimes that can start with an assessment to see, do you have enough information for your own team if they're in place to solve these problems? Or how can you help to add strength to that team, augment their data, augment their tooling, frankly, augment their resources with other bodies to try to help this thing get better? Because this is a challenge that everybody faces. We see the increase in the sophistication of the attackers. And while Ryan describes accurately the fact that this is truly an asymmetric threat, the more we all work together, the more we multiply the benefits of one organization knowing how to solve a problem, the less asymmetric it becomes. I'm Jack Danahy from New Harbor Security. I want to thank my fellow panelists here during the course of this discussion, and mostly, I want to thank all of you for taking time aside from your day to learn more about this, to learn more about the value and the efficacy of the platforms that you're using, like Defender, like Sentinel. And I hope in the future, if we can be any help at all, you'll let us know. Thanks for joining.